Curselock LitRPG Curse Magic Adventure. By Left Right. Chapter 21, Profit. I think they are too tight. Jude hesitated a step, reaching down and smudging his new boot laces. He then stomped and caught up with the others. A few steps later he repeated the process, all the while holding a look of disgust. After the 6th or 7th lace correction attempt, Glennie had enough. Come on, man. The first 3 pairs were too big, then the next 4 were too small. And now you are saying the only pair that remotely came close is slightly too small. The town of Lion Trunk was in a bit of a hurry. News had spread about the attack on the guard building housing the dungeon entrance. Without having all the facts, the general consensus was that the invaders were aiming to break the dungeon core and ruin the town. People rushed all about, selling as much stock as possible even if it was under significant market rates. The important monolion organs had spiked in price, something which Leland noticed while he sold the parts he brought back. The alchemist he sold to was more than willing to buy everything he had, even the lion-toad parts. The man wasn't able to identify the parts, which Leland played off as simply being from a mutation near a knoll camp. The man only shrugged at the shoddy answer, not caring as he hit an alchemical gold mine. Leland also sold off the pelts and toad leather, finding various sellers through the market district. The toad leather got a bemused eye, but nothing more. When Leland finally returned to the others, Jude had just picked his shoes. I can't help it. Jude sputtered. You know what might help the situation? A beautiful. Glennie interrupted. So help the legacy of berserkers, if you play that cursed harmonica right now, I will shove it down your throat. Jude's eyes quickly found the cobbled street, not before slyly playing a low long note as his shoulders slumped. Glennie only smoldered. Leland took a deep breath. Come on, Alkin should have our reservation by now. The others took the cue and followed along. They ventured across the town to the relatively small magical district. While a booming adventurer town, the magic aspect had taken a sidestep to the sword and shield. That didn't mean the town was without magic, quite the contrary in fact. Many alchemical advancements had been solved or assisted by mages. As it turned out, specific aspects of mana proved quite fruitful when it came to stumped alchemists tinkering with volatile transmutations or distillations. Through the winding streets, past shops selling the magical, Leland and the others walked. They passed bay windows showing self-repairing trinkets, elegant dual weapons, magical staves that sparked with different color gems, even a dress enchanting shop that sold clothes that looked to be on fire or soaked with liquid gold. The mage district was, and always would be, Leland's favorite area within a town. He felt at home, he felt like he could feel his parents around every corner. They eventually reached the town's only auction house where armed guards dressed in stark black suits waited outside. As the trio approached, they felt icy stares slowly bounce up and down their bodies. One of you, Leland? One of the guards asked, his tone less than interested. That's me. They are waiting in room 1. First right, then first room on the left. Thanks. With the doors held open for them, the boys quickly scurried through. They entered an overly opulent waiting room. Golden trim and white marble met their tired eyes, the sudden reflected light nearly blinding them. Jude even groaned, raising his hand to shield himself. I hate snobby places like this, he whined. Glennie shrugged. They have the money and the means to help us, so, get over it. Jude rapidly opened and closed his mouth, making muttering noises as he went. Real mature. Guys, please. Let's not piss anyone off this early, Leland said, a vein on his temple bulging. They followed the guard's instructions and entered room 1. Alkin was inside, sipping tea with an impressively dressed older woman. She wore a monocle and enchanted gloves, her salt and pepper hair tied tightly in a bun. Ah, finally, Alkin said, standing. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Appraiser Joy. Leland stepped forward, his hand out in greeting. She took it, shaking deeply. Hi, I'm Leland. Sorry we are late, someone had a shoe problem. Joy smiled. Yes, Master Onryo has informed me of your latest adventures. I especially appreciated the harmonica tales. Glennie face-palmed as Jude stepped forward with his hand out as well. Hello friend of the finer aspects of music, I'm Jude. She took his hand. I could tell. Not very often do we have individuals here that look almost exactly as described. That got a raised eyebrow from Glennie. Do you often have people describing others? Oh sure, Joy motioned to the couch. We often have masquerade bidding. Our attendants have to memorize what people look like so we can charge the correct account. You don't number the guests and have them raise said number. We did once upon a time. But you will find few respected establishments still using such an outdated method. Illusion spells and tampering with bids became quite the spectacle about a decade ago. Glennie could only mutter, "Hey." Joy smiled again, moving a metal tray with instruments and tools before her. Master Onryo tells me you three have several items you need appraising? Oh, please help yourself to tea or cookies. Jude's eyes lit up. Leland ignored him and pulled at his pack. He placed the bone gauntlet, black glistening cloak, lit candle with a blue flame, and golden orb on the coffee table. The appraiser's eyes lit up. May I? She asked, receiving several head nods. She went one at a time, picking each item up, looking it over, then used several different tools. About an hour later she had gone through the 4 items and presented her findings. Starting from least involved, we have the bone gauntlet. It is made from monolion femur and skull. Interestingly, the bone has been warped like metal, thus creating a rather potent protective design. It will be most suitable for a warrior archetype and will increase pure mana defenses by a slight amount. If you would like the exact numerical value, that can be arranged at an additional charge, of course. Everyone looked to Jude, who shrugged. He took the gauntlet and slipped it on. I feel indestructible. Quick, Leland, cast something on me. Leland coughed. No. Jude sat back and pouted. Joy cleared her throat. Next, we have the golden orb. At first I was quite confused as to what I was looking at. But she dinged the orb with a metal tuning fork, causing cracks to form along the gold. As you can see, this is a cracked caller's orb. Leland's eyes widened and he sucked in a deep breath. What aspect? He asked, holding his breath. The cracked orb will increase the spell potency of any gold spell. As in the metal. As in what we use for money. Joy then summoned a black box. It appeared from thin air, where she then placed the orb before the box disappeared. Royal law states that any magical item that increases the effectiveness of gold spells are to be taken at once. With an appropriate monetary accommodation, of course. Leland deflated but nodded anyway. The royals took minting very seriously. Last thing everyone wanted was artificial inflation. How much will we be receiving? 93 gold paid and stamped by the royal treasury. Any bank will be able to cash the note. Even Alkin's eyes were wide, and he was a noble. 93 gold for just a single item. Indeed, Joy said plainly. Wait a moment, Glennie spoke up. You said least to most involved. The orb was beaten by the cloak and candle. Joy smirked. Very much so. Allow me to continue. The candle is next. This is a highly specialized magical item. Without more testing we will not know the true effects, but rest assured, at a minimum it will significantly increase the effectiveness of spirit fire. The boys instantly turned to a wide-eyed Alkin. Joy kept going. From how rare spirit fire and the accompanying legacy, I would suggest the starting bid to be at least 250 gold. In my opinion it will sell for 300 plus. The room was silent as Alkin sucked his bottom lip. He eventually gave Leland a subtle head shake. I see, Leland said to Joy. My team and I will have to discuss selling such a valuable item. Joy smiled as if she expected the answer. Then let's continue and then I'll give you all some privacy. She pointed to the cloak. Now, let me preface what I am about to say with this. This is my opinion and I stake my title as senior appraiser on my word. That caused everyone to sit on the edge of their seats. This cloak could be either worth a small fortune or nothing at all. Have any of you ever heard of parasite items? Chapter 22, Tale. Thank you for the appraisals, Leland said, paying Joy for her services. If we decide to auction any of the items, we will be back. Joy nodded and pocketed the coin. She held open the door, allowing the others to leave. As they exited, she gave a final bow and spoke, "It was wonderful to make your acquaintance. Please come again." With that, they were back to the streets. It was nearing dinner at this point and a restaurant was quickly chosen. They asked to be seated somewhere private, an accommodation that brought the group to a table on the second floor towards the back. After ordering, a conversation broke out. "We sell it," Glennie started with. "We do not," Leland countered. "Agreed," Jude chimed in. They both looked at the brute. "Is that an agreement to sell it or to not sell it?" Jude raised an eyebrow. "Yes." Leland threw his hands up, turning back to Glennie. "We both know that selling it is a mistake. You just don't want to be the one to get it." Glennie hesitated a response. "Maybe. We don't need money. We are adventurers, we always have quests to take. And, if anything, we need you protected and or with a higher damage output. But we don't know the cloak's effect. It could be something detrimental to me being a rogue." Leland's head tilted. "So," he asked. "If it is, then you just stop wearing it. The potential for something great is simply too large." "Which only makes the potential for failure all the more worrisome," Glennie quipped back. With a flamboyant eye roll, Leland looked to Alkin. "What do you think?" The young man hesitated. "I think Glennie should take it." "Ah, what do you know?" Glennie said with a huff. "So we are all in favor then?" "Yes," Jude exclaimed. "No," Glennie denied. 2 on 1, we win. 3, actually, said Leland. The food came, which also brought on a bout of silence. They quickly scarfed down the food, except for Jude, who felt sick from eating so many cookies. The meal consisted of braised meat, more braised meat, and even more braised meat. Monolion flank was a popular and abundant cut, it seemed. As dessert was served, Leland said, "Let's table the cloak conversation for the moment, despite the clear resolution, and talk about the candle." Alkin raised a hand. "I cannot afford the item. But if you would allow it, I would like to give my right of first bid to my family. I am sure they will pay handsomely for such an item." The restaurant was filling up at this point, the tables to either side of them full. Leland whispered his response. "That would mean we must take you home to have the potential of your family buying the item. It would be better just to sell it here. Less risk that way." Alkin tapped his fingers against the table. "True, but if you do decide to fulfill the role of bodyguard and escort me home, then why not sell it to my family? I understand there is added risk, but in the end my family will get the candle one way or another. We are, collectors of spirit fire artifacts." "Yeah, but aren't you hurting for money?" Jude asked, his tone not pulling any punches. "That is true. I still need to find that lawyer. How do you expect to pay us for the candle plus the escort home?" Alkin straightened his back and pursed his lips. "I have the money to hire you 3. My family has the money for the candle, we just may need to sell a few things." Leland let out a long sigh. "I don't know. Do we even want to escort you out?" He jumped from his seat, drawing the eyes of nearly the entire restaurant. Slowly, he sat down, covering his left hand. He could feel the blood slipping through his fingers. Gritting his teeth, he wrapped a napkin around his tattoo. "You okay there, bud?" Jude asked. Leland sneaked a peek. The crow on his hand was flapping its wings like it was trying to scare off a predator from invading its nest. Yeah, I'm fine. Like I was saying, do we Evangram? A sharp pain drilled into his hand again. Slowly, Leland expelled his anger. I think we should escort Alkin home. As the young master's eyes widened, Jude and Glennie's crinkled. Are you sure? Glennie asked. Pretty sure, Leland replied, pressing his still bleeding hand into the napkin. From there the conversation turned to logistics. How much supplies they needed, how much money they were going to charge. Shoutwell was 2 weeks on Mount, significantly farther than the 1-week caravan trip to Lion Trunk that they just completed. Regardless, plans were ironed out. Alkin separated for the night and planned to meet back up the day after tomorrow. In the meantime, he was going to look for the lawyer his family desperately needed. He wasn't hopeful, however. He had already asked the Inquisitor about a lawyer, receiving many non-answers as to why she couldn't help. Still, he had an active quest for information at the guild. Maybe he'd get lucky and his coin wouldn't go to waste. The boys started towards the inn district, but their nightly stroll was abruptly cut short. They were being followed. I spot 4, Glennie said, his eyes mutating into lizard-like slits. Are they posturing to rob us? Leland asked, shifting the pack with the items behind his back. Sadly, their conversation at the restaurant wasn't as private as he'd have liked. And, with the knowledge that someone cleared the dungeon, making an informed guess as to who did such a thing was rather simple. In fact, Leland mentally berated himself for visiting Lion Trunk's appraiser. He had unintentionally created a massive target for the town's legacy of thieves. Looks like, Glennie replied. We should prepare an ambush. Jude agreed instantly, although Leland was a bit more hesitant. Just don't kill anyone. We don't need more attention than we already have. The huntress watched the dark streets from the rooftops above. She was camouflaged against the cloudless night sky and downwind. She was invisible to any and everyone below her rank beside a special few legacies. But the likelihood Leland was one of those was absurdly rare. So, she sat back content with her vantage point. She had to commend the one called Glennie. He spotted the thieves much faster than she had anticipated. Maybe she should have hired more competent lowlives. It would have been informative to see how they reacted to being robbed, but she figured it may be more informative to see how they dealt with street combat. Would they murder their attackers? They would have every right. However, that would still tell her plenty about the group and how they operated. The huntress activated an ability and turned her eyes into that of a hawk. She didn't want to miss a single detail. Hey, she sputtered as the fight started and abruptly ended. Did Leland even cast a spell? She replayed the fight's events back in her mind, watching every detail in excruciating slowness. It started when the boys entered a dark alleyway. Not the best choice for a public fight, she figured, but one that would help the rogue thrive. Acceptable, she mused. The big one, Jude, stepped forward and yelled something that provoked the dumbest of the 4 robbers. She remembered him from when she hired them and predicted that he was the one most likely to mess up the operation. She was happy to see she was correct. Jude took the first strike, lashing out with a sucker punch to the man's jaw, instantly sending him to sleep on the cold dirt alley. At the same time, Glennie appeared from the guise of partial invisibility and his friend's destruction. He landed a hard elbow to the back of the neck of one of the other goons before pivoting and thrusting the hilt of his dagger into another's gut. Both men fell over, unconscious. Frankly, the huntress was impressed with the showing, but something strange caught her eye just before Jude knocked the last thief unconscious. The thief had drawn a knife and lunged for Jude's neck. From the angle, trajectory, and ability the man used, the blow should have landed. It, of course, would have done little to stop the berserker lord, but still. The fact that the attack didn't land put the memory on repeat in the huntress's mind. She watched it over and over again, her heightened eyes picking up every detail no matter how small. She looked over Jude, finding nothing out of the ordinary. She looked over Glennie, finding nothing but the rogue recovering from his own attacks. Then, as a last guess, she looked at Leland. She watched him stand there, his eyes vigilant and narrow. She watched him speak to the thieves before Jude's surprise attack. She watched him stand in the back doing nothing. Or maybe not. He was muttering, the huntress noticed. It was slight, maybe a single word. But his mouth most definitely moved. A spell, that was obvious. But what kind? What could stop a man's attack like that? Legacy of time? No, too obscure and would be more noticeable. Legacy of ice? No, frozen spells leave water as evidence. Legacy of repetition? Ah, who was she kidding? She was just pandering to her need to always be right. She had no idea what Leland's lord was, especially since he bore a crow tattoo. One thing was certain, she would find out even if it ate into her vacation days. With the fight concluded, she slipped off the roof and packed her bags. She'd be traveling soon. Shoutwell was it? She thought. It's been a while. Chapter 23, Devil is in the details. Leland was the first on guard duty after the boys reached their inn. They didn't believe thieves would be so bold as to attack them in their room, but who knew at this point? With all the absurd things that had happened lately, Leland decided they couldn't be too careful. While the others were sleeping, it gave him plenty of time to see how his spells progressed after the lion-toad battle. Grimoire in hand, Leland read through the new entry and its accompanying spells. You have assisted in killing a mutated monolion. An appropriate reward has been added to your legacy. Fracture has increased to rank 6. 80% chance to break a random bone in a single target. Curse of Collapse has increased to rank 4. Exhaust the target for 80 seconds, lowering their speed by 20%. Harbinger Halo has increased to rank 2. Contract lasts for 120 seconds. Leland's eyes widened at how long Harbinger Halo could be activated. With a single upgrade the contract duration doubled. There was no guarantee that that pattern would be maintained, but the potential still brought a flutter to his heart. At some point Glennie woke up, thus allowing Leland to fall asleep. In the morning, the first thing the group did was purchase a greater mana potion and head towards the nearest Lord of Magic shrine. Leland was purposely cryptic about why he needed to do such a thing, but he also promised to tell them once he was sure they weren't being watched. The threat of thieves spreading unearned information was decently high, especially since Glennie found 2 separate parties following them. Do we need to take them out again? Jude asked, cracking his knuckles. I do not believe so. They are staying back, likely only scouts for the more powerful. Leland frowned at that. Then shouldn't we beat them up? If they are scouts, then we don't want whatever they learned getting back to their bosses. Glennie only shook his head. No. Think of it like this, I can see these scouts and am only a low-ranked rogue. If the boss deems it necessary to send someone with better ability, then I will have no clue if we are being followed. Ah, keep your enemies close, Jude filled in. Exactly. We should deal with the Magic Lord Shrine and spend the rest of the day in the inn. It will be boring, but it's the safest option until Alkin is ready to leave. The others agreed, and eventually they entered a small magic shop on the edge of the magic district. Leland stepped up to the counter and rang a small bell. The shopkeeper came out from behind a curtain, wiping mana residue off his hands with a dirty towel. Can I help you? He asked. Leland answered. Yes, although it may be a strange request. I'm looking for a shrine to the Lord of Magic. Do you have one here I might be able to rent for a few minutes? The shopkeeper gave him an odd eye. What do you want to rent it for? Just to pay my respects. Not many mages around the town, no public shrines as far as I could find. Eventually the man nodded and said, no payment needed. Follow me, the other 2 will have to wait here though. Not much room in the back. Leland was led through a tinkerer's workshop. Tools and magical reagents sat on shelves or took up workbenches. Wands, staves, gem-embossed gloves, and even enchanted scrolls. Just a month ago Leland would have been so excited to visit a shop such as this. Now, with his legacy not within the realm of actual magic, he only saw it as a remembrance of his parents. Still, some of the stuff was neat. "Here we are," the shopkeeper said, pointing to a small stone-chiseled statue. It wasn't of a person or god but rather the symbol of magic. The stone took the form of a runic circle with a triplet of chain circles in the center. It represented the three main branches of magic. Mana and mind were the obvious two, but the third was still a hotly debated topic. Some scholars said the third ring was lords and legacies, while others argued that it was more personal than that. It was something yet to be fully realized, something that every mage did subconsciously. Leland always believed the latter of the two, and that the outer runic circle represented the lords, not that it mattered to him anymore. He thought. I wonder if I could create a contract with the Lord of Magic where he'd just tell me. That line of thought brought on more questions about Harbinger Halo and just what was possible with contracts. The simple fact that he could make contracts with lords, and have some degree of negotiations, was simply so overwhelming. Leland eventually kneeled before the statue and made sure the shopkeeper had given him some privacy. He placed the greater mana potion on the small pedestal, then waited. And waited. He whispered, Lord of Magic? I brought the potion we agreed on as payment for our contract. Then the mana potion disappeared, simply faded from existence. Well, okay then. See you in a year. With that, Leland walked back into the lobby and found the shopkeeper and Jude playing harmonicas together. A gloomy Glennie was silently brooding in the corner but perked up when he saw his friend enter. Finally, let's get going. I can't handle this any longer. You are just jealous you can't play an instrument like us. The shopkeeper chimed in. You know, I sell a magical variant of these things. Want to take a look? 10 minutes later, the boys stepped out of the magic shop, Jude with a magical harmonica in one pocket and 35 gold less in another. They walked through the streets back to their inn, Glennie plugging his ears the entire way. Once situated back in their room, Leland spoke up. Okay, so. I have a spell that allows me to gain something from other lords. What? Yeah, I know. Pretty crazy, right? But it's real, 5% spell potency from the Lord of Magic, real. At the cost of a mana potion? Glennie asked. Leland nodded. It's not always going to be that simple. The Lord of Magic was doing a favor for my lord. It was an example of what is possible with this sort of thing. Jude and Glennie sat back. What lord are you going for next? I'm thinking of the Lord of Spirits. Not something cool or dangerous. I'm in favor of you taking from the Lord of Berserkers, Jude waved off. Maybe later, Leland answered. I need something to bargain with, but I figured that saving Alkin brought me more favor than not. Glennie slowly understood. So it's like a contract? One you can negotiate. Exactly. Well, what are you going to ask for? That's the problem, I don't know. For the next hour, the boys talked about different things Leland could contract from different lords. When it came down to it, until Leland found out more about what was possible, they went with simple things. A fire spell from the Lord of Flame, a water one from any of the water lords, a healing spell would be important. If spells were off the table for now, maybe a passive regeneration ring or life force regeneration ring. In the end, they spent the entire evening in their room discussing. With a late dinner in their bellies, they fell asleep while taking lookout shifts. The next morning came with a surprisingly easy escape. It only took a few hours to find Alkin, purchase mounts, and ready themselves for 2 weeks of travel. They were set back a decent chunk of coin, but a quest was a quest. It was still profitable, and frankly the boys wanted to leave Lion Trunk. Too many eyes, not enough worthwhile investments. Did you find the lawyer? Leland asked. Alkin's shoulders slumped. No. Not even my guild posting helped. She's a ghost. What exactly is the issue again? I know you said your mother was in debt, but what kind exactly? The young master Onryo deliberated for a minute, deciding exactly how much he could share. My house paid a large lump sum to the royals to have their inquisitors investigate House Icewillow. Their findings, while fruitful, also left a large void in the economy of Shoutwell. We are slowly taking their place, but we needed more capital. So, my mother took out many loans, all of which we could pay back. The issue arose when my eldest brother, the heir to the house name, started getting into trouble. He decided the best way to launch House Onryo into future prosperity wasn't financial means but instead magical. He spent most of my family's reserves on items, potions, tonics, even a miracle elixir or two in hopes that it progressed his magic more than what was standard for our family. And I take it he failed? Leland asked. He was killed drinking an experimental potion, but yes. Alkin paused for a moment. A lawyer would help clear his debts now tacked on to my mother. Glennie spoke up, was your brother onto something? Would his plan have worked? Evidence points to yes, but we'll never know at this point. Jude leaned back, pulling out his harmonica as they stepped out of Lion Trunk and onto the dry path. Before playing he said, if only there was a way to talk to your lord. You could just ask him yourself. As two separately pitched versions of the same note came out of the magical harmonica, Leland couldn't help but think that sometimes Jude was a genius. Chapter 24, The Long Road. Travel to Shoutwell was decently eventful. There, of course, were monster attacks, often leaving them a hair away from death. They came from the trees or hid within the streams, often surprising the group from decisive flanks. But the simple monster was no match for Leland, Jude, and Glennie. Jude and Glennie were simply impossible for the monsters to ever touch, and if one ever bit or mauled Leland, the others would wreak havoc upon its life. And that was a large if. Leland's magic proved quite adept at simply stopping monsters from charging. Randomly breaking bones and a 20% slowed movement had only failed him once. It was at night and Jude was supposed to be on watch. But instead he was practicing the harmonica silently, oblivious to the outside threats. The monsters came in a single circular wave, stretching the length of the tree line and blocking any advance and retreat. Goblins. Relatively smart fiends, goblins were considered a scourge to human life all across the continent. Growing in massive nests, goblins moved across the countryside, pillaging any and everything. More lives were lost to goblin kind every year than any other monster. With a royal kill on sight decree, many made names for themselves, taking out entire conclaves. A snap broke Jude from his harmonica practice, pulling his attention like an owl scouting a dark field. His head popped up, his hearing strained, he even sniffed the air. "Wake up!" he bellowed, rousing his three traveling companions. A whistle screaming through the air forced him to act, pulling at his tattoo and summoning forth his blood-stained battle axe. Using the weapon like a shield, Jude stopped the arrow cold. It ricocheted off the steel, bouncing harmlessly to the ground. It was then he smelled it. Poison arrows. The call put Leland and Glennie into motion, the latter of whom shifted invisible and rushed out. A deep purple halo blazed into life with a powerful roar. A slight amethyst hue radiated out and illuminated their camp. Fracture, slow, maul, Leland unleashed his spell arsenal, spinning in a circle and spreading his influence wide across the encroaching goblin party. The smoldering embers of the dead campfire then burst into life with a great blue-black flame. A flume of fake heat and power reached the height of the nearest trees, then like a blowtorch calibration, the spectacle receded back to red-hot charcoal. Alkin huffed with sweat dripping from his forehead, his entire mana pool spent for a single illusion. Meanwhile, Jude and Glennie bisected or gutted every target they came across. Volcanoes of blood and muscle splattered into the gravel road, spines and dismembered appendages were left in a wide wake. Some goblins screamed in retreat, rushing back to the tree line or regrouping with the stronger few. The boys pushed the advantage, breaking their formation into a tactician's worst nightmare. That was, until the snarling appeared. From the trees and under the cover of darkness, 6 yellow glowing orbs stalked around the camp. With only a failing fire and purple halo as light, the boys failed to notice the initial charge. A bola flew through the air, wrapping around and stopping Jude from retreating back to Leland. Leland dug deep and pushed his mental fatigue, curses flying left and right. Fracture after fracture, while a murder of crows dive-bombed with great urgency wasn't enough to stop the assault. The razor-sharp teeth of a dire wolf tore through his mage robes, ripping into his flesh and pinning him to the ground. "Leland!" Jude shouted as he yanked the bola from around his ankles. A crude spear then stabbed into the ground beside the Lord of Curse's head. Eyes wide and scared, Leland then saw the goblin leader riding atop the wolf. "Maul!" he yelled, pushing his whole flock onto the double enemy. A snap sounded from Leland's arm as his bones were crushed, a grunt escaped his lungs, causing his next spell to fizzle into oblivion. The goblin thrusted its spear again, only for it to be intercepted by a crossed pair of daggers. Fracture! A painful shriek sounded from the maw of the beast, loosening its grip just enough for Leland to reclaim his arm. He scurried back as Glenny's tongue launched forward like a cannonball. It collided against the goblin leader's chest, doing nothing more than give the monster a slight whiplash. A sinful cackle escaped its lips as the pair jumped away and a second dire wolf took its place. Jude entered the fray a moment later, fur glued to his hands and shoulders like a demented papier-mâché, with the corpse of the last wolf paces behind him. He took first initiative, his eyes going hollow as rage boiled over. He didn't flinch when the beast bit into him, he didn't blink when his chest bled into fleshy ribbons. He only had one thing on his mind: to kill. Glenny returned to the shadows with his invisibility activated. He first made sure no other goblins remained near the road, then turned his sights to the leader. The wolf mount was licking its front paw, a slow trickle of blood leaking from protruding bone. The legacy of the chameleon smiled and took the kill shot. Both daggers sunk in deep, passing through the wolf's ribs like a shovel does clay. He twisted his hands and body, activating his gushing ability. Blood and bits of organs rocketed out, spraying like a broken water hose. Moving to a blind spot, he then stabbed again. Then a third time. And a fourth. The wolf collapsed, sending its master to the dirt. Glenny didn't give the goblin a chance to stand, a slit throat was enough to seal the deal. "Jude, listen to me. Are you in there? Come back to us." Leland's cries for his friend were only rivaled by his cries of pain. His mangled arm laid limp beside him, blood flowing like a waterfall. Skin and muscle were easily identified, as was the noble form of Alkin Onryo as he stepped between Jude and Leland. Jude only breathed, his eyes long turned into something devoid of reason. Steam rose from his blood-covered arms and back, the fury doing more than simply changing his head space. It was eroding his body, killing it from the inside out. Glenny returned to being invisible, stepping forward to potentially stop the berserker. Long ago, when Jude had his dream ceremony and chose the route of his mother, Jude's father had contacted both Leland and Glenny. They had been warned about the signs, they had been told about how Jude would degrade if left untreated. It was expected that this wouldn't happen for a few years, giving Jude plenty of time to come to terms with the changes and overcome them. Evidently, they had pushed too far too fast with their adventuring. "Come on, Jude, fight it. You know what is going on. Fight it." Color came back to Jude's eyes a moment before he blinked a few times and fell over. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. The days after the goblin battle were tense to say the least. With Leland's arm held to his chest in a sling and his ring of regeneration on full blast, the party had to travel significantly slower. It also didn't help that Jude had been quite nauseous, frequently needing to stop to expel his lunch or breakfast. Still, one early morning before Alkin returned from washing in a nearby steam, a conversation was held about Jude. "No more fighting until you figure yourself out," Glenny said. Leland agreed. "It's not that simple, guys," Jude replied with large dark bags under his eyes. "I can't not fight. It's a part of the legacy of the Lord of Berserkers. It's in my blood. What do you suggest we do then? Because we can't go through another significant fight where we don't know if you will turn on us. I won't turn on you guys. You already have. In the dungeon. Jude's shoulders fell. Oh right. He shook his head. My mom said she had to go on a journey into her own mind, to not lose herself. Whatever that means. Leland spoke up, trying to be as still as possible. It means you need to meditate and learn to control your rage. Honestly, it sounds similar to how a mage has to focus to cast spells. If their concentration is broken, the spell fails and fizzles. We could also, you know, contact your mom and explain the situation, said Glennie. No. Jude yelled before his eyelids slammed down and his face wrinkled. He groaned in pain, his hand rubbing his temples. It's getting worse. The rage is getting to you, Leland said plainly. We will hold off on contacting her for now, but if it gets worse. Jude nodded. I can do this, please trust me. We do, we just don't want to see you hurt. Leland then had a thought, one he smirked at. We are a day away from a decently large port city. I'm sure we could find a book on Berserker syndrome. That got another groan from Jude. You know I hate reading. Glennie rolled his eyes. Then I'll read it to you. Jude thought about it for a moment. Do you think they will have books about harmonicas? I might read one of those. Chapter 25, Shoutwell. Deep within the sewers of Shoutwell, like-minded people were gathering. Most wore red robes and obscuring hoods, carried ritual-serrated knives, and hummed muted chants. They walked in pairs, shoulder to shoulder through the twisting foul tunnels. Muck and ichor dripped from the ceiling and leaked down the walls, but they didn't care. They couldn't, not when something as grand as the calling was due to start soon. They walked in low flickering candlelight, eventually reaching a concrete room of worship. An eyeless statue met their gazes, forcing the devout to fall to their knees upon entry. Each gestured with silent prayer, finding their seats among the unholy pews. Soon their leader took center stage, her hood down and her bandaged eyes on full display. She led the room in chanting, she broached difficult subjects. Some cried, others yelled in agreement. Regardless, she had the room enthralled, the statue of her lord silently judging from behind. It is time to expand, she said, her white robes flapping despite lacking wind. House Onryo is weak, they will not stand before us. It is time. Go, my flock, go and spread our Lord's message. As the crowd cheered with raw emotion, one man kept to his seat. A newcomer, one that joined the coalition from the burnt remains of House Icewillow. The man watched with careful eyes, hoping to stay hidden in the shadows of the celebrations. But the leader had seen. She raised a single hand, silencing her children. What is it, my son? She asked. Please, speak your mind. Nearly 100 eyes turned to the man, each pair hidden behind dark cowls. He could feel their sinister minds, however, he could feel their hunger. He was but a mouse, one trapped by countless cats and the fear that came along with it. He was petrified, but a nearby hand raised him to his feet. He was guided forward, just before the podium and stage. The leader stood there patiently waiting, her hands clasped in front of her belly. Suddenly the man's hood was pulled down. He cowered with shame, he scrambled to keep his anonymity. It was too late, they all saw, they all knew. Ah, I thought all of the Icewillows were killed, the leader asked. He waited. He didn't want to answer. The cold of sharp iron against his back urged him to reconsider. I am only a branch family member. A secondary soul in name and life. A smile befell the leader's lips. It matters not what one once was here, only the future of someone can be. The man nodded, feeling the knife release its pressure. A whisper shocked the room, along with a low grumble and bright red light. From within the eyeless statue, crimson shined through. It washed over the coalition, highlighting the most devout. The leader was first and she trembled with acceptance. "I see," she explained. "I understand. I will follow your will." The man raised his head, dread settling as the red light ignored him and focused elsewhere. It befell those closest to the stage, then those in the first of the pews, then those in the back and the few watching the doors. Everyone was bathed in red, everyone had been baptized with something new. Except the man. He ran, right through the pews and towards the sewers. But he never reached the doors. He never passed the midpoint of the room. He was stopped, frozen in fear and unbounded pressure. Suddenly he was spun, and the leader came back into view. She held her arm out with invisible grip, blood trickling from her nose like a busted faucet. As her eyes wobbled with the sudden strain, she squeezed until the captured man stopped struggling. When a bloodied corpse was all that was left, the statue released its hold, returning the room to candlelight. The leader then held her arms out wide. He was not a believer. Only a peon trying to cash in on our Lord. She stumbled a bit, catching herself against the podium. The Icewallows have fulfilled their role as smuggler. Our Lord is here, in Shoutwell. It is up to us to piece him back together and feed him. It is time to expand. It is time to spread our Lord's words. Alkin held out his hands with a grand gesture, the city of Shoutwell just down the hill. Home sweet home. From their vantage, the entire city could be seen. Deep red brick, black tile roofs, and dark grey stone made up the foundation, along with a perpetual wetness. Salt was in the air, the crashing waves nearby, and ships floating harmlessly in the great blue. An intricate and dated dock edged the city into the water while green moss and barnacles invaded the land. Shoutwell is a decently sized port, the main export being hops. Jude interrupted. Among beer and mead, yes, Alkin finished. The brute shook his head, pointing. No look, hops. And a lot of them. Tall stalks of green leaves and thousands of small flowers made up the path leading into the city. Harvesters quickly moved through their crop, removing the grown hops while fighting off pests with the legacy abilities. Shoutwell has a world-renowned brewery. It's actually one of the main tourism attractions. People love to drink. Leland and Jude both hummed along in interest, despite Glennie's obvious brooding. They had discussed it during the trip and they did not plan to stay long. The city housed horrible memories for Glennie, most of which were repressed. Was this city worth her death? Glennie muttered to himself. Could burn for all I care. Out of the corner of his eye, Leland saw his friend's darkened tone. Speaking to Alkin, he asked, "What did the Icewallows do here? What did they do that started the investigations?" Glennie glared at Leland for asking the question. The whole team knew quite well what the Icewallows did. In fact, Glennie felt sure that they knew more than the average city resident. Was Leland trying to provoke him? Drug creation and export, smuggling, murder, thievery. The usual, I suppose, Alkin answered. Why? I was just wondering if the city had seen any positive growth since then? I would suspect having a major drug manufacturer gone would improve living conditions for everyone, Leland said, catching an eye from Glennie. Oh yes. In fact, the inquisitors who dealt with the case suggested my family invest in centers where those affected with drug withdrawals can receive help. Then there is the lack of general organized crime. Shopkeepers are quite thankful for that. Fake protection was quite expensive as far as I'm aware. Leland raised an eyebrow to Glennie, who scoffed in response. Jude stepped in, seeing Leland's plan. So, you would say that the Icewallows were a plague and having them removed was a major benefit? Most definitely, Alkin answered. Shoutwell will forever be in the debt of the Royal Inquisitors who ousted the Icewallows. In the debt of your parents, I mean. Glennie's eyes widened and he turned away. The salt was getting to him, irritating his eyes to the point of welling with tears, or at least, that was what he would have said if someone brought it up. The truth was much more meaningful. As they neared the gate, Alkin spoke up. Before we enter, I would just like to say a few words. I may not look it, but I am indebted for what you three did in Lion Trunk. I know you did it for your own reasons, but saving my life was not something you three needed to do. If anything, forgetting me would have been the smart thing to do. Still, I would like to give my thanks again. I've had a lot of time to think about the risk you took during the trip here. You've been nothing but cordial even though I have not been. If anything, frankly, I have been rude. House Onryo means more to me than you three might believe, and I hope we all can stay acquainted and on good terms later in life. Jude slammed a meaty hand on Alkin's shoulder. Yeah, you were pretty rude at the beginning, but I've grown to like you a bit. Leland laughed at that. Remember when you tried to kill me with spirit fire? Good times. Alkin reddened. I don't know what the future holds or if I'll ever return to this city, but it was nice meeting you, said Glennie. A rushed guard stopped their entry, however. The man came out in full armor, stepping to stop their approach from the gated city. Identify yourselves. They looked at each other before Alkin sighed and pushed his mount a few steps forward. I am Alkin Onryo, fourth son of House Onryo. Do you permit my associates and I entry into the city? The guard squinted, finding a small crest embroidered into Alkin's clothes. He motioned them in, but stopped them before they passed the threshold into the city. There's been quite a few murders in the last few days. I suggest a noble like yourself head straight home. It is not safe on the streets. Murders? Leland stated. How many dead and in what manner? Alkin asked. Only 6 so far, but that is estimated to go up quite a bit. The first body was found 3 days ago in the sewer, squeezed to death. The other 5 had been squeezed to death as well, but in sacrificial ways. What do you mean? Each body has had their eyes gouged out. Leland, Jude, and Glennie all leaned back. They took a collective breath. What is it? The guard asked. You know something, Don Cha? They did, and they wished they didn't. Their parents, while drunk, had talked about some of their more horrid cases during their time as inquisitors. From serial killers to grotesque artificial plagues, they had seen it all and then some. One such tale was the cause for many sleepless nights when the boys were young. One that still haunted their parents, one that had changed how the inquisitors saw religion. Call for the inquisitors, the sightless cult is in Shoutwell, Leland whispered. Chapter 26, Call for Help. A glint pulled Leland's eyes to his slung hand. The crow tattoo craned its neck, staring back at him with its rounded emerald eyes. It opened and closed its mouth like a repeating silent alarm. Nearby, Shoutwell's city guardsmen sputtered in confusion and non-words. And know that C can T I don't. T that makes S so much sense. It's okay, Leland said, burying his hand deeper into his sling. Just contact the inquisitors. They've dismantled the cult before, they'll do it again. That stopped the guards trembling enough to allow the others entry into the city. Leland then watched him run off, likely towards a guard station or barracks. He turned to the others, let's sell Alkin's mount and get to his family home, quickly. Wait, what? Alkin asked. You three aren't staying? Not with the sightless cult here. I'd suggest you get your family out of town as well. The city's noble flicked his nose into the air. And leave my civilians to die? How do you even know it's the sightless cult or whatever you called it? You only heard a description of a few murders from a random guard. Glennie took the liberty of answering. I guess there is the possibility it's just a serial killer with an affliction for eyes. But the sightless have a long and horrid history of encroaching into port towns. Ports, why? Smuggling, Jude said, his eyes locked firmly on the damp muddy ground. They smuggle parts of their lord and try to reconstruct it. If they succeed, all of Shoutwell will be in the ocean. Alkin only stared back. Leland picked up the slack. Our parents have fought them before. They don't often talk about the horrific aspects of their work, but the sightless was one they did. You and your family do not want to be here, even if it's only a possibility. Alkin pulled the reins on his mount and headed into the city, ignoring the sinking feeling in his gut. They traveled through the streets, finding them empty and eerie. Shadows moved beyond windows and curtains, the partial appearances of people spied beyond corners or alleys, and there was not an ounce of sound. As they moved, Alkin became restless. He shifted his weight from one stirrup to the other and back, a similar motion finding his neck and eyes. 6 bodies and this is the city's reaction, he muttered. Total fear. Leland held his tongue. It's not that simple, he thought. They encroached on a rushed elderly man and his adult daughter packing a wagon. As they neared, the pair became increasingly worried, speeding their escape despite their trembling hands. The family even left a few of their belongings. Leland frowned at the situation, but as they passed by the abandoned home he gasped. There, painted on the door in fly-encrusted red, was a crudely drawn closed eye. Don't look at it! Leland shouted, snapping his eyes closed and turning away. The others did the same, even the hesitant Alkin. What is it? A sigil or a mark, depending on what legacy you ask. What does it mark? In this case? Death, Leland said through gritted teeth. Here waits those nearest the truth. The mark of a vile lord, the sightless king. Think of them as the cult's legacy tattoos, supplied Glennie. Artificial, just like the lord they follow. Jude chewed his lip. We need to report it. The guard will need confirmation that the sightless are here. This is it. They all agreed to the detour and got to walking. As they got further from the sigil, the city became more lively. A cold forbid dance still hung in the air, but people were out and about. It was mainly the capable, however. An obvious lack of elderly and children was apparent, something that was keenly noted at the guard station. A line stretching from the double-door entry point nearly reached the next building over. Alkin froze at the sight. What are they here for? Glennie asked. The young master didn't respond, instead slipping off his mount and powering through the crowd into the building. He got many protesters as he went, men and women annoyed by the sudden line cutting. Glennie sighed, following along. A few minutes later the crowd abruptly dispersed following a guard captain's orders. Glennie peeked his head out of the building, motioning for Leland and Jude to follow. After tying up all 4 mounts, they did so. As they entered, Leland was instantly bombarded by questions from the captain, all of which pertained to the sightless and the sigil left on a home only a few streets over. With the captain getting his fill of answers, he began to bark out orders to the eavesdropping guard. A few minutes later, the report had been completed and Leland and the others were free to leave. Oh, and don't leave the city, the captain said as parting words. Yeah right, all 3 boys thought independently of each other. Alkin, we need to speak with your family. Leland stopped. And our mounts were stolen. Great. Jude looked over to where he and Leland had tied the horses. At least we travel light. Glennie rolled his eyes and patted the pack with the dungeon items in it. Glad none of us use saddle pockets. Then Jude's eyes went wide and he subtly patted himself down for his magical harmonica. Last place he saw it was, when he put it in his saddle pocket. He groaned internally, trying to hide his furious face. It didn't work. You okay there, Jude? Leland asked. This is no reason to go berserk. We are only out a few gold. Jude's lip twitched but he forced down the anger. At least he still had his mundane Harmon nope, that was also in the saddle. He took a long breath and tried to look internally. Forcing down anger wasn't the way to go, he knew. But it was by far the easiest. So, he went a different route. He counted to 10. 9, 10. I'm good, he said. Glennie patted him on the back. Come on, it's going to get dark soon. Let's get to Alkin's house. The dark was the least of their worries. News about the sigil had spread further than the street where it sat. People were out in droves, boarding their windows or buying any and all food they could. The fog wasn't helping either. It came in like a slow tide, forming from the sewer grates before reaching ankle height. It ebbed and flowed, moving down the street before doubling back on itself. By the time the group reached Alkin's mansion, the fog had grown to tower over the smaller buildings. As they pushed through the gated fence, a silver shimmer forced Jude to shove Leland out of the way. Metal clashed against metal and a stark wave of air mellowed out the dense fog. The attacking man pivoted on his heel before stepping before Alkin. "Stay behind me, young master." "Bor!" Alkin yelled. "These are my friends, stop your attack at once." It was then Leland fully examined Bor. The man was quite well dressed, full tailored butler suit and the accompanying strict posture. He carried a silver rapier with a marble white hilt, a color that matched his elderly hair. "Ah, my apologies. The fog got the better of me. Can't be too careful nowadays, young master," Bor said, slipping his weapon back into his tattoo, a silver stick figure man mid-thrust with a similar style sword. "Don't apologize to me, apologize to Jude." Bor looked his employer in the eyes, a faint squint as he did so. "Well, all right then." He turned to Jude. "I apologize for my sudden attack, I hope I did not injure you." The legacy of Berserker's eyes were closed. 10 seconds later, he opened them and spoke, "I understand and I am fine." Leland and Glennie both stared at him. "Is mother home?" Alkin asked. "In the study." "Shall I take your guests to a sitting room?" Bor asked. "No, we all need to have a conversation. Including you." "I see, I will start the kettle then." "Cookies or muffins?" "Muffins," Jude answered instantly. "Of course. Right this way please." The group followed Bor to the study. After ushering them in, the butler then disappeared into one of the mansion's many hallways. "Leels, can I borrow your ring of regeneration?" Jude whispered. "He broke my hand." Frowning, Leland subtly shifted the ring over to his friend just before his mouth suddenly dropped open at the sight of the study. He was sure it was bigger than his hometown's library, at the very least it definitely had more books. Shelves from wall to wall and in neatly spaced aisles were stacked from floor to ceiling with books. All sizes and colors made up the spines, some even housing obvious magical properties. "Mother," Alkin said, causing a dainty head to swivel. "Ah! My little munchkin." The others froze at the nickname. "We've been over this, please do not call me that. We have guests." "See, my little Alkin, that is precisely why I called you that. Humiliation builds character." Alkin coughed. "No it doesn't." "Sure it does," Lady Onryo argued. "In fact, I can already see it working. You've already made powerful connections." Alkin frowned at that, mirroring the look on the boys' faces. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Word travels fast when you have a network such as I." She then turned to the others. "You three were the ones to take out the homicidal Icewillow. Some people in high places are quite impressed." Leland's frown deepened. "Have you been spying on us?" Lady Onryo gave a predatory smile. "Do you think I'd send my little munchkin out without supervision?" "Yes," Glennie challenged. "If you sent supervision, why didn't they save Alkin before he was taken into the dungeon?" Her smile twitched. "Forget that. We have larger problems to deal with. I don't know if you've heard, but we have a small cult problem." Chapter 27, Quest. "You have a cult problem, yes. The Sightless, if you want to be specific," Leland corrected, receiving 4 frowns from the 4 people in the study. Lady Onryo pursed her lips. "See? Already you're helping. Isn't that great? You made some great friends, Munchkin." This time Leland frowned. "And now that we've seen our friend home, we best be leaving." He started towards the door but stopped when he saw Jude and Glennie's feet planted. They both shared the same look, one that Leland knew he should have as well. For a long moment the three friends stared at each other. Frustration bloomed in Leland's hands, turning white with clenched morals. "Excuse us for a moment," he said to the nobles. Jude and Glennie followed along, finding themselves in the corner of the study. With crossed arms, Glennie spoke first, "We can't just leave." Jude crossed his arms as well. "We have to help at least until the Inquisitors arrive." A vein in Leland's forehead throbbed. "This is not a good idea. Jude, you are having issues with your legacy, and Glennie, you obviously hate being here. We are also just starting out as adventurers. Are we really going to tie ourselves down here? If you want to be the type of adventurer that leaves at the first sign of danger, fine by me. But you are going to have to do it by yourself," Jude replied, receiving a brutal head nod from Glennie. Leland stepped back a half step. "We all almost died fighting Icewillow. And he was just one man. How are we supposed to go against an entire cult?" "We don't," Glennie answered plainly. "We save that for the professionals. We just help where we can. We can get into places Inquisitors can't. We can hear stuff Inquisitors can't. People will talk to us because we are adventurers. And what happens when our little investigation attracts the attention of the sightless? I don't know about you two, but I personally like my eyes." "We run," Glennie said. "Or fight," Jude added. "But it won't come to that, not if you stay here with us. We all know you are the smart one in this team." Leland made a forced grunt-groan sound, his hands stuck midair like he was trying to rip a melon apart from the two ends. "Think about it, Leels," Jude said. "What would our parents do in this situation? That's a low blow. One that needs to be asked regardless. None of us like being compared to our parents," Glennie spoke up. "But like it or not, we are their spitting image. You two more than me, that is." Leland fell into a soft and deep chair, bouncing his broken arm in the process. He crumbled in pain, the tension of the trip bursting from his lungs. "Do make yourselves at home," Lady Onryo yelled from across the room. All three of the boys rolled their eyes. Jude whispered, "We need rest anyways. Your arm and my problem need to be addressed. And we can't exactly do that on the road. So what? We both sit around while Glennie hunts for information." From the other end of the room, Lady Onryo coughed. "Bor has no problem accompanying the rogue if need be." Everyone, even Alkin, stared at the woman. It was then Leland saw a speck of black-blue flickering flame hiding under a nearby end table. With a forceful mental probe, he crushed the scrying spell. Lady Onryo raised her hands in surrender. "Conniving wench," Jude hissed. "We are in her home, after all," Glennie sighed. "Still doesn't make it right," Leland said before his able hand rubbed the sand from his eyes. "What are we going to do? We are a team and I'm not breaking us up this early. I still think we should leave. We know the stories of the sightless, and I think they are a bit over our pay grade." Icewillow was as well, Glennie smiled. "Remember what we told the Huntress? We defeated him because of teamwork. We can help the city in the same way. We stay and help." Jude started the vote. "Agreed," Glennie said. Leland closed his eyes and simply breathed. Leland the coward formed and bounced around his head. It came from the darkest parts of his mind but soon grew to a wrecking ball of self-doubt. It screamed through his thoughts like an animal's survival instinct. Cower away, leave the city, go back home, hide in mom and dad's shadow. What did he tell himself a few weeks ago? That he'd prove himself without the name of his parents? That he'd forge a name for himself along with Jude and Glennie? He chose the path of the adventurer, not whatever intrusive idea he felt that day. A pain racked his broken arm, blood started beating from the back of his hand. He smothered it quickly, looking to Jude for his ring of regeneration. The berserker lord begrudgingly gave it back. "Are you in?" he asked. "Yeah," Leland said. "Thanks for keeping me on the right path." The three shared a smile before Glennie broke the warmth. "Care to tell us why your hand keeps bleeding randomly?" "No, it doesn't." "It most certainly does," Jude said instantly. "I must not have noticed," Leland trailed off, the sight of his two friends' glares enough to freeze lava. I'm not really sure. I think it's my lord trying to tell me something. In this case, I think I have earned a new spell." "In this case?" Glennie asked. Leland scratched his head. "Sometimes she urges me towards certain choices, like coming here for example." Glennie facepalmed, but Jude broke into a great smile. "That's good, right? It means your lord, the one who you said seemed lonely, and didn't have many legacies, is watching out for you. No way she'd let you get killed by some cult." "I hope you are right." "I know I am," Jude laughed. "Let's test it. Say you are not helping and that you are leaving right away." Leland sighed. "I'm not helping and I'm leaving now." Nothing happened, the tattoo didn't even flinch. "You did it wrong," Jude said flatly. "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did." "How do you know?" Leland whisper yelled. "There's not really a manual about speaking to a lord through a legacy tattoo." "Guys, let's table this conversation," Glennie intervened. "We have people waiting on us." "Exactly. Let's just agree that Leland did it wrong and move back to more important things." "I did." "Stop, guys, please. They are watching." Leland bit his lip, finding the Onryo family and Boar sitting around the study watching them. One of Alkin's siblings had arrived, and despite looking quite confused, still managed to smirk at the boys before her. She was older, early 30s Leland estimated. But as age increased, often did rank as well. For all he knew, she could be in her 60s while the mother was in her 150s. They were, after all, a family of mages. "Forgive us," Leland muttered, finding a seat with his hosts. "Tea?" Boar asked, holding a bronze kettle still piping steam from its spout. Jude's eyes lit up. "Yes please, and those muffins if you don't mind." Expertly, Boar poured each occupant of the study tea and passed out banana nut muffins. He went ahead and gave the brute a second helping as well. "So," Lady Onryo said. "What's the verdict?" Leland gave one last glance to his friends before speaking. "We will help Shoutwell to the best of our abilities, at least until the Inquisitors arrive." "Very well. We will provide you three with lodging and monetary subsistence for the duration of your stay. Depending on your ending value to the city, further rewards will be given." That made Leland pause. "That seems extreme." "How do you mean?" Onryo asked. "Why do you think we will be able to do anything that requires a noble house to present rewards? Seems far-fetched to think we will do anything worthwhile. We are, after all, a newly tattooed team." Lady Onryo smiled, looking to her son. "Munchkin here told me about you three and your misadventures while you were discussing something, the big one's problem, and your collective hatred to be equated to your parents. I don't understand how. What better group to fill in for the Inquisitors than the children of the most well-renowned Royal Inquisitor team to date?" Three annoyed sets of eyes found Alkin. His mouth gaped a bit before speaking. "What? Did you want me to lie to my mother?" Leland rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Fine, rewards will be appreciated. In the meantime, I think we are expecting some coinage for our travel here with your son." Lady Onryo raised a hand, signaling Boar to place a small sack on the table before Leland. "We also have a rare item that might be of use to your family," Glennie supplied, removing the blue flame candle from the safety of his pack. Leland cut in, "We also know about House Onryo and their monetary struggles. Therefore, if my friends agree, we will loan the candle for the duration of our stay. If you decide you want to keep it, then price negotiations can be done at that time." Lady Onryo's face twitched. "Very well. May we move on to the issue of the sightless? Boar then presented a large map of the city on a wheeled chalkboard. 5 red circles were highlighted along 5 different streets while a single red circle was seemingly placed at random. The first body was found in the sewer. He was also wearing ridiculous red robes, Lady Onryo continued. Until the guard found a sigil of an eye on a house. We found that actually, Alkin interrupted. Until a sigil was found on a house, we didn't know the sightless were involved. We suspected a cult, but not one with such great magnitude. Until the Inquisitors arrive, I suggest we try to locate the parts of their lord that are being smuggled in, Jude supplied. Lady Onryo hummed through pursed lips. Chapter 28, A Mug. After a full night's rest in warm and soft beds, Leland, Jude, and Glennie made their way through the quiet streets. They ignored the hastened pitter-patter of civilians fleeing as they neared, they ignored the shadows watching them. They were outsiders here, Shoutwell simply didn't have the need for adventurers compared to Lion Trunk. There were no monsters the city guard couldn't handle, no nearby ruins to pillage, no dungeons to supply endless alchemical research. The city's import and export economy needed general security, not adventurers. So, 3 young men walking down a dark street with the telltale signs of fighting experiences were cause for concern. Leland supposed he was the least intimidating of the 3, only his enchanted mage robe signaling to the onlookers that he was not an average citizen. Well, that and his broken arm. Jude was next in line for least fear-provoking. Without his battle axe in hand, he simply looked the part of an armored goon. From the subtle plated armor below his tunic and bone gauntlet on his wrist, Jude was ready for battle. Glennie was the most eye-catching despite his thinner frame. With slitted animalistic eyes and twin daggers upon his hip, the young rogue produced a certain level of threat as he neared. The fog wasn't helping either. Glennie had long been trained to look for an advantage in battle, such as moving with the ebb and flow of obscuring mist. He slowed and increased his pace when necessary, oftentimes blending into the shadows or hiding around streetlights. Either way, the people of Shoutwell found safety when the group passed. A 7th body had been found, something even the guard couldn't keep quiet any longer. That very morning, the city's mayor had given a statement about the killings. He urged everyone to stay indoors as much as possible and only to venture out for necessities. It seemed most didn't heed his words. Shops and workers were moving right along with the day, albeit much more cautiously. Leland could understand it. No one thought they'd be the next victim, not when people had mouths to feed. Work was a priority for some, especially of those with family. Their first stop, much to the distaste of the patrons present, was a brewery named the River and the Cavern. From the moment they pushed through the door, alcohol and tobacco smoke met their noses. Despite being early morning, the tavern was nearly to capacity with rough-and-tumble sailors, midnight laborers, and the occasional simple alcoholic. Entering the establishment brought many eyes to them, most of which froze with fearful expectancy. Some carried on drinking, pulling knives out of their boots and slowly sliding them along the wooden tables. The threat was clear, something Leland sought to rectify right away. With a little urgency in his step, he headed straight for the barkeep. "Hello, fine sir. How about a mug of your finest?" The man just looked at him. Leland tried again. "I've heard that beer is popular here, how about a mug?" Still, silence. From behind, Jude face-palmed. He strolled up, slapped a gold coin down on the bar, and said, "3 mugs, whatever is cheapest." The barkeep looked at Leland before turning back to Jude. He scoffed, grabbing 3 wooden mugs and blowing the dust out of them. He then added a little extra spittle to the bottom of one particular mug. A moment later, the mugs were filled with the perfect ratio of drink and foam, thanks to the barman's legacy ability. With the mugs before each of Leland, Jude, and Glennie, the patrons found better things to do. Most still watched the newcomers out of the corner of their eye, but knives were put away while ice melted. "What? Not going to drink it? Too cheap for ye," the barkeep asked Leland as he was the only one of the three who hadn't taken a sip. Leland eyed the frothing cup, wondering if he'd be able to taste the spit. A sideways look from Jude made him curse and take a sip. "It's delightful," he said back to the man, receiving a curt scoff for his troubles. They took a few minutes to sit and stew in the bar atmosphere, but a nod from Glennie caused Jude to call the barkeep back over. Meanwhile, Glennie activated his heightened senses and listened. A little loudly, Jude spoke after sliding another gold coin to the barkeep. "We are looking for information about a few unique items recently smuggled into the city. Can you be of service?" From behind, the patrons had slowed their own conversations and paid attention. "Perhaps. What kind of items?" "Body parts." The entire tavern went silent, even the barkeep. Slowly conversation filled back in, everyone suddenly disinterested in the newcomer's conversation. Glennie's ears twitched with stain. "Can't help you there," the barkeep said. "Shoutwell's not famous for monster parts. A bit of a hike, but Lion Trunk is known for magical tigers or something." "Monolion," Leland muttered, blowing into his foamy mug. Jude flicked his eyes from his friend back to the drink pourer. Much quieter than before, he spoke, "Not monster parts. Not human parts either, if you were wondering." He slid 3 more coins over. "Something that, say, people would collect. That the right group may kill for." Abruptly Glennie stood up and walked out of the building. Jude and Leland didn't acknowledge it, neither did the barkeep. "I might know something," the man said. "It's going to cost you more than a few coins, however. Give us a taste and we might be inclined to pay more." The barkeep leaned in, whispering, "I've heard rumors about odd shipments coming in over the last few months. Seems there's a hole the Onryos haven't patched yet." "Patched? How do you mean?" The man held his hands up. Jude sighed, pushing another few coins forward. "Ah, I remember now. A smuggling hole, a crack in the guard's dock security left over from House Icewillow. Went dormant after the house fell, but suddenly it's back up and running." Jude slid more coins over, nearly an entire purse. "And where is this hole?" "Ah, that is the question," the keep purred, his eyes wide with greed. "Some say it's in plain sight. Others say it's a day away on horseback." "You don't know?" Leland said frankly. The man glared at him, then turned back to Jude. "I do not, correct. But a smuggler named Poppy might. She's a bit of a loon if you ask me." "Reputation or personality?" Jude asked. The man smiled, shifting his eyes to the sack of coins. "Ah. Know where we can find her?" "I do not." "I see. Anything else I can help you gentlemen with?" the keep asked. Leland rapped his knuckles against the wooden bar. "Do you sell beer by the barrel?" The man just stared at the mage. "He's serious," Jude added. With a sigh, the man said, "Yes we do." "How many do you want?" Leland smiled. "Just one, and the most expensive kind you have." "Do you deliver?" The barkeep was not impressed. Back outside, after Leland handed over about half the number of coins Jude did, they found a semi-invisible young man crouching behind a cart. Glennie revealed only his hand, signaling a direction further into the fog. Jude and Leland turned the opposite direction, and walked away, leaving the rogue to do his thing. Glennie slowly made his way through the dense fog. He could only see about 15 paces ahead, but that was all he needed. He, if forced, could potentially follow his mark blind. Those without sensitive ears never would truly know how loud footsteps were. Especially when the person making them was trying to be silent. It was a bit of a misleader, as Glennie's parent had taught many years ago. Those actively trying to be silent, unless trained or making use of a legacy ability, always left evidence of their route. So, despite not knowing where his target was, all he had to do was listen. Slip pitter-patter. Glennie dashed forward, making his own footsteps sound as if they were on cotton. The huntress hated fog. Such a simple thing could cancel out most of her legacy abilities. She could hear and smell, sure, but those two things were nothing compared to eagle-eyed vision. Still, tracking the boys had been easy if not a complete cakewalk. Frankly, she wondered why she even decided to investigate those three any more than she already had. Sure, they had secrets, Leland especially, but was this really worth her time? They had brought the young Onryo home, their job was done. It would be a while until they found a new quest to take. Shoutwell wasn't exactly known for catering to adventurers. No, the town was a port, maybe they'd take a job as some harbormaster's muscle. Hopefully they don't, the huntress thought. Otherwise I'm going to go broke from hiring thugs to attack them. She internally groaned. Why was she doing this? Because she felt something was off with Leland? Because she trusted her gut and knew something diabolical was going on with the young mage? Or was it the simple fact that she hated to be wrong? She hated to lose and felt stalking three children was a perfectly fine use of her time. As the hours ticked by, she slowly found herself leaning to the latter. At least, until a silent green streak passed through her vision. The streak circled around her once before falling just before her eyes. She rolled her eyes at the primitive summons notice, idly thinking of writing another petition to have the Royal Inquisitor messaging system revamped. How many times had the streak blown her position? How many times did her target get suspicious from the light show in the sky? Luckily, the boys didn't notice. They were too busy in some dive bar. The huntress grabbed the streak, finding it dissolved into a parchment letter. She glossed over it, reading each like a chore. She paused, then reread the letter. The sightless are here? And other inquisitors won't be here for a number of weeks. She laughed. Oh ho, looks like my gut was correct after all. Watching the rogue named Glennie stalk through the fog-covered streets, the huntress wondered just how the boys were going to get themselves involved. Chapter 29, Red Eyes. What was that, Leels? Jude asked, on the walk back to Onryo Mansion. What do you mean? Have you never talked to a stranger before? Why'd you talk without any subtlety? Leland frowned. Didn't you see the way they looked at us? The whole tavern was looking to eat us. Jude stared incredulously. You've stared down monsters and fought with a murderer, yet some drunkards worried you. Well, when you put it that way, Leland sighed and shifted his sling back to a better spot on his shoulder. The pain was mostly gone at this point, his ring of regeneration doing wonders. I don't know what you want me to say. I'm not a good actor, lying doesn't come all that naturally to me. Jude had to agree with that. For as long as they had known each other, only Glennie had been truly known as the liar. And even then, it was within the rogue's blood to look for any advantage possible. Jude and Leland simply weren't built the same. Changing subjects, do you need anything else for the beer? Jude asked. Honey. And lots of it. Honey. I guess any syrup would work, but I have a feeling honey would be the easiest to find. We just have to find a general store, Leland said. Easier said than done. I can't see much through this fog. We won't know if a store is nearby until we come across it. Silence befell the pair as both craned to peer through the fog. Without Glennie, the only of the three with heightened senses, traveling through the city had slowed significantly. There was no rush, however. Not until Glennie rejoined them, at least. I hope he's doing okay. He is. It's just that, well, I don't know. Since killing Icewillow he seems more distant. Jude nodded to that. Let him come to terms with it. It's a difficult situation. He hasn't even sent his dad a letter. Really? I remember him writing one, Leland said. He wrote one, just never sent it, Jude yawned. I think he wants to tell him in person. Leland glanced at his friend. What about you? I've noticed you counting a few times. It helps. Any more to it than that? Jude sighed. Not really. It just, It just helps. I don't know. A shadow pulled both of the boys' attention. A civilian walked by, hood up and moving fast. Excuse me. Jude yelled over. Can you tell us if there is a general store around here? And she's gone, Leland said. I guess she was in a hurry. They both watched the patch of fog where the mystery woman passed through. Giving a shrug, they continued. Until they came across a group a few dozen paces further down the street. They were huddled together and crouched, like a set of scientists inspecting a new species of ant. City guard, Leland whispered, recognizing the uniform. And a dead body, Jude whispered back. It was then Leland saw it. Sprawled across the cobblestone street and covered in a sheet, was the outline of a human. Crimson leaked out in a wide berth while also pooling into the portion of the sheet that covered the head. One of the guards noticed them watching. Stop you! Leland and Jude both held their hands up in surrender. We were just walking by. The guard, an older gentleman, raised a bushy eyebrow. Not many people are walking around recently. We had to get some supplies from the store. We'll starve at this rate, Jude answered smoothly. You've got enough meat on your bones to skip a meal or two. Leave some food for the rest of us, Ed. Actually, we are looking for honey, if you know any spots. We're visiting our uncle for his birthday, you see. Need some for the sweetbread. The guard cocked his other eyebrow. Is honey the new street drug of choice? Leland frowned. No. Like actual honey. Preferably with the comb. The man squinted. Jude moved the conversation along. What happened here, if you don't mind us asking? Another murder. Just like the last. This makes 9. 9. Leland asked. Last we heard was 7. Another body was found a few streets over about an hour ago. Missing eyes. The guard gave Leland a long hard look. Yes. How'd you know that? You know something. Nothing more than general knowledge. Did you talk to the woman who just walked by as well? She seemed in a rush. The man suddenly straightened his back and raised his chin. Describe this woman. Jude took the lead. Not much to say. She wore a fully white set of robes with the hood up. The fog blocked us from seeing any real details. Grunting, the guard waved over one of his comrades. The newcomer was younger and wore higher rankings on her uniform. A few minutes after again describing the woman in the robes, Leland and Jude were pointed in the direction of the nearest store with honey. As they were leaving they could make out a bit of the guard's conversation. Same description as the others, the older guard said. Doesn't mean anything. Could just be a coincidence, the younger cut down. Lass, trust me. I've been on this job for more years than you've been alive. Coincidences like this don't just happen. Leland and Jude didn't say anything about the matter and kept walking. They eventually came across a small shop with shelves upon shelves of preserved food. Leland bought his honey while Jude restocked on jerky. Another short walk later, and the boys were standing before the gates to house Onryo. Waiting for Glennie, Leland reviewed his newest curse and accomplishments. Circle of Souls. Type, Curse. Rank, 1, B. Call upon the souls of the damned, casting the power of the Lord of Souls into an area. Encase the souls of those within 5 yards, siphoning their life force while chaining them to this reality. Fully consume a soul to increase your magical potency by 1% for 1 minute. Leland frowned at the spell. On one hand, having a spell that affected an area was a great boon. Single target curses would only get him so far, but from the description he wasn't sure if he wanted to use Circle of Souls. He had questions, many of which were unanswerable until he tested it out. You have assisted in killing multiple goblins, hobgoblins, dire wolves, and other beings not worthy of praise. An appropriate reward has been added to your legacy. Fracture has increased to rank 7. 85% chance to break a random bone in a single target. Crow Massacre has increased to rank 5. Summon 8 ethereal crows to attack a target for 1 minute. Harbinger Halo has increased to rank 3. Contract lasts for 180 seconds. Hey, Leland said. What? Jude asked. My grimoire's explanation for my rewards says, and other beings not worthy of praise. Any idea what that means? Just that they were too easy for you, or us I guess, to kill. Thus earning you nothing in the way of reward. Leland frowned. That must be why the ridiculously strong don't randomly kill normal people. Just not worth the effort. That's dark, Jude scoffed. You don't think there's more to human nature than not killing simply because it's not worth it? I didn't say that, it's just, well, we both know the stories. The Inquisitors have to hunt powerful murderers all the time, but they always kill other powerful people. Not normal citizens. Well, if they did kill more than a few normal citizens, the lords would get involved. Leland nodded to that. Brand those people as witches for life, what a scary thought. How do you mean? Just that the lords know when too much is too much. They are so powerful that they can simply wave a hand and mark someone as a witch from worlds away. Jude nodded to that. They can't interfere more than that, however. Smiting those cowards would be too much. But that's what the witch hunters are for. Glennie showed up an hour later huffing and puffing. I think I've found something, he said, rushing straight into the mansion's study. Lady Onryo and Alkin were already inside, the younger of which was intensely staring at the blue flame candle while the older gave pointers. When the boys entered, they both stopped, joining the conversation. While in the tavern I eavesdropped on a hushed and scared conversation, Glennie said. 2 men talking, both dock workers. The first was older, maybe the other's boss or something, I'm not sure, it's not important. The younger was scared, like working for his life scared. He mentioned something called the Eyeless, which was what caught my attention. Glennie shifted his attention to the map of Shoutwell. He marked the brewery, then traced a chalk line through the streets until he came to a sewer entrance. The younger of the 2 men got into an argument, which ultimately caused the younger to leave. I couldn't hear all the details, but I got enough to follow the man. He led me to the sewers in a very paranoid way. Paranoid how? Boar asked from the doorway, causing the boys and Alkin to jump. Oh, sorry to startle. I had no intentions. It's fine, Glennie said. The man was trying to silence his footsteps. He wasn't very good at it. Anyway, I couldn't enter the sewers. Something blocked my path. Something? Leland asked. My instincts. There was a pressure behind my eyes, it forced me to look away, it forced me to keep walking. I've never felt something like it before. Sigils, Leland answered. You looked at one. It must have been hidden somewhere in plain sight. Something that you didn't notice as off, but was. Can you think of anything like that? Glennie recoiled. No, I don't think so. Leland leaned over to Jude and whispered something. Jude then stood and walked around to the other side of the couch. Glennie, I need you to look me in the eyes, Leland said. No, no way. Please, it's important. Oh, okay. Both friends leaned forward in an impromptu staring contest. Glennie's emerald eyes met Leland's off silver. Except, that wasn't true anymore. Deep within Glennie's irises were specks of red. Tiny, almost unnoticeable by regular means. They floated around carelessly, drifting like lily pads on a windy day. Then suddenly, the world around Leland opened into a black void. Reality shifted and twisted, changing like every heartbeat was a new century, like every breath was a different world. A slit sprouted from below his feet, opening into a grand red eye not a decade later. It stared at Leland, watching his every movement and twitch, trying to breach his personal securities and invade his mind. Tendrils rose from the whites of the eye, black ethereal strands, each grasping for life in Leland's bones. He ripped his sight from Glennie's own with a roar, returning the world back into the study. Leland wobbled on his feet, but was able to shout to Jude before the nausea took. "Do it!" Jude didn't miss a beat and locked Glennie's head within the crook of his elbow. Chapter 30, Sigil. Jude didn't release his grip until Glennie stopped struggling, and even then he was cautious. He laid the unconscious young man on the couch, making sure to prop his head up with a pillow. Meanwhile, Bor and Alkin looked horrified. Lady Onryo on the other hand watched with mystique. "Sigil sickness I assume," she asked no one in particular. Leland, forcing himself not to throw up, nodded. "Do you have a copy of Brix's Guide to Defending Magic here?" The lady snorted. "Of course, one moment." Leland had already moved on. "Bor, I'm going to need some chalk." The butler nodded and left the room. "Okay, Jude. Can someone explain what is going on?" Alkin yelped. "Glennie is dying," Jude said frankly. "Wah? Not yet, I can fix him," Leland said, turning back to the legacy of berserkers. "Jude, if he wakes up, make sure he doesn't stay awake. He's going to fight it whether he wants to or not." Jude nodded, clearing a spot in the center of the study. Lady Onryo returned with a thick bound book, one covered in layers upon layers of dust and cobwebs. "Hasn't been all that useful," she said, handing the tome to Leland. He nodded, flipping through the pages after checking the table of contents. He stopped on a page filled with a singular detailed runic circle. He groaned, it was worse than he remembered. Bor returned with the chalk and Leland began sketching the circle into the floorboards. Lady Onryo watched with scrutinizing perfection, calling out Leland's failed lines or telling him to deepen the chalk in particular areas. At some point she fell to her knees and helped as well. When they were finished, Glennie was just rousing. Jude punched him in the jaw, sending him back to the void. Everyone looked at him. "What? You said to keep him unconscious." Leland was too nauseous to care. "I can be the one to break the sigil," Lady Onryo said. "I have more than enough mental strength." Giving her a small smile, Leland said, "Thanks for the offer, but Glennie is my friend. I wouldn't feel right if I wasn't the one to do it." "Fine, but if something goes wrong, I'll step in." "Thank you." "Jude, can you put him in the circle?" Jude and Bor worked together, moving the skinny young man into the circle of chalk. As soon as they backed off, Glennie's eyes shot open. Red light poured from his irises, deepening trickster shadows and elongating the breaths of those present. Railroad spikes formed and pushed from behind everyone's eye sockets, pressure built within their heads. Alkin fell over from the sudden mental attack, only catching himself on a nearby chair. "Don't look, Alkin!" Lady Onryo yelled, signaling to Bor to escort the young master out of the study. "Whenever you are ready, Leland." Suddenly books and papers took to the air, flying around the room with a mighty gust of wind. A howl like a house being ripped from its foundation roared through the windows and curtain, breaking glass and tearing fibers. Jude tried to knock Glennie out once again but failed to take a single step. An eye had opened below him, one with grasping hands of influence that kept him bound to his mortal coil. He yelled with silent direction, his words failing to breach the deafening bellows. Leland had reacted on instinct, finding his grimoire already in hand and open to the correct curse. His palm slammed into the page, sparking a violet halo into life. Magic and mana pooled around his heart and head as he flipped back a page. With his own life force lighting the spark and completing the spell, he yelled the power word. Slow. The curse disappeared into the vacuum of the study before finding Glennie like a beacon in the dead of night. For a moment they were connected. The world shifted back to darkness with a beat of their heart. They were one of the sightless, their eyes crusted over in red energy and corrupt poison. They saw nothing other than what the being hidden within Glennie's eyes wanted. They were trapped, they were depressed, they were angry. Their mind twisted and warped, changing into something beyond devotion and prayer. Leland saw it, the sightless king. It was only a freckle, a tiny hateful being of sizeless authority. Nothing more than a wicked idea formed through the worst emotions the world had to offer. It had contaminated those who wished to bring it back into the spotlight, it had polluted those who wished it only love. It tried to do the same for Leland, in the end. But Leland was only viewing it. He was not hosting it. The study came back into view along with Glennie and the bound Jude. Leland pressed against the being hidden within the sigil, forcing it to submit into the nothingness that it was. The chalk flared into weaponization, burning with pure white fire. Flames sought the source of agony, growing across the floorboards with a hasted surge. Glennie lit like a bonfire, his sluggish thrashing suddenly coming to an end. "Don't let up now, Leland!" Lady Onryo yelled into his ear. She placed a hand on his shoulder, adding her strength to his own. "The fight starts now." Together they pushed the sigil's container, flooding it with mental zeal. The container bulged, the red specks within Glennie's irises swelling like droplets of rain gathering on a window. Sweaty and drained, Leland suddenly tasted blood. His eyes wobbled, but the hand on his shoulder squeezed tighter and tighter. He kept up with the barrage, eventually feeling the sigils pop. The white flames instantly winked from existence as flying books and paper took to gravity. Harsh thuds sounded throughout the study as things finally came to a rest, Leland being one such thing. He fell to his side, crushing his nearly recovered arm and causing a bolt of electricity to blaze through his nerves. Despite the pain, Leland stayed awake. He pushed himself towards Glennie, finding Jude already crouched over him. Jude pulled at Glennie's eyelids, staring into white emerald irises. "See any specks of red?" Leland asked. "Just green." "Good, good." Leland allowed himself a slow blink, finding Glennie and Jude missing when he came back around. With momentary panic, he scanned the room, finding them both sitting up and chatting on the couch. It was then he realized he himself was on a couch covered in a warm blanket. "Ah, he's awake," Jude said. "How are you feeling?" Glennie asked. "Jude gave me your ring of regeneration, I can give it back if you need it." A cough escaped Leland's dry lips. "Are you all right?" "Insides and eyes burn. Skin feels like it's sunburnt." "You keep it then." Leland sat up, finding a circle of burnt wood in the middle of the study. "Was that us?" "Was that us?" he asked. "Classic," Jude laughed. "Where are the others?" "Well, Alkin is probably still asleep. Bor said he passed out before he could fully get out of the room. Bor is probably with him. Lady Onryo is at a meeting with the guard captains and city mayor." Leland nodded, leaning back and closing his eyes. "Sigils Suyuk. Did you?" Glennie's voice faltered. "See it?" Leland supplied. "Yes. That thing is no lord, not even a king. It's vile." Glennie shivered. "It whispered things. It wanted me to do stuff. I didn't even realize it was there. I thought everything was perfectly fine." Leland nodded along. "I know. I felt it as well. I felt you as well. Are you okay? Like with everything that's happened since arriving at Lion Trunk, I mean." Glennie took a long minute to answer. "I don't think so. I feel so numb to it all. Is there anything we can do? When we were connected, I felt like I was drowning." Just drop it please." "One step at a time," Jude said. "I found counting to 10 to help immensely." Glennie raised an eyebrow. "Like in your head?" Jude went to respond, but a knock at the mansion's front door stopped them. A few seconds later, Bor appeared in a pristine tailored suit. "Did one of you three order a barrel of beer?" he asked. "Oh, that was me," Leland answered. "Do I need to sign for it?" The huntress listened to the conversation inside the House Onryo estate via the chimney within the study. She had moved much closer than initially planned when a light show of crimson red and deep purple clashed within the mansion's windows. Even from her vantage point several streets over she could hear the horrid howling wind. It wasn't until the bright white flames that she realized just what was going on inside the house. She had heard the guard talking of sigils but without confirming such things for herself, she didn't believe it. Now she believed. Oh, she believed all right, just like she now actually believed the sightless cult was in the city. She had shrugged at the time, thinking that it was more likely a wannabe copycat group, not the real thing. Oh, how she berated herself for being wrong. It was the boys, she declared, their odd decisions and behavior had gotten to her. She almost laughed at the thought. The huntress was well accustomed to chasing murderous witches. She had long found her natural talent for thinking like a criminal. She had long learned her knack and paved her path through life making the most of it. Who'd have thought that 3 boys would make her second-guess her instincts, plain as day evidence, and herself. Once confirming that the one named Glennie and the other, Leland, were fine, the huntress took to the streets thinking over the conversation she eavesdropped on. They were connected, she replayed in her head. What the hell does that mean? Some sort of blood ritual? Maybe a binding spell? She groaned, finding the sewer entrance Glennie had frozen hours ago. A bow appeared in her left hand while a yellow spark appeared in her right. She stared at the sigil, finding its contours carved across the walls and floor. Again she berated herself. She'd never have found this on her own. Well, that wasn't quite true. She'd have followed the drunkard and reached the sewers as well, but she wouldn't have been affected by the sigil. The sightless king would have hidden itself well, allowing her to investigate the entrance without interference. But a helpless young rogue? Now that was prime pickings. With a flash of yellow, the sigil was scrubbed from this world. Chapter 31, Deals. All right, I don't know how long I'll be gone, or if I'll be gone for that matter, Leland said, laying on a soft bed. It's probably going to be like the dream ceremonies, and my body will remain here. Jude set the barrel of beer down next to him. Then how is this thing going to come into play? Ah, that is a good question. You don't know. This is unmapped ocean here. I have no idea what I'm doing. Glennie, on the rails of sleep, murmured, at least you are honest with yourself. Jude and Leland looked at him. Go to sleep. I am, but some people keep making noise. Leland sighed. All right, I'll start. You are going to guard us, right, Jude? Last thing we want is Lady Onryo or Boar getting suspicious. Jude pulled up a wicker seat to a window and sat down. I'll watch outside and inside, don't worry. Leland laid back and started the spell. Magic and experience came to his mind, spinning around him with a dance of life. They took to his command, taking the form of a crow's quill. His legacy spoke to him, telling him the exact words to say. Lord of Spirits, I humbly wish to strike a contract with you. Within the bedroom, power compounded into Leland before he suddenly passed out. Glennie, now fully awake and alert, and Jude looked at each other, shrugging. The first thing Leland noticed was an orb of glowing blue light. It sat in the distance, like a lantern shining through a far cottage window. It drew his attention, urging him to keep his eyes on it while pulling his motionless feet closer. He found himself rushing towards the light, his body not moving, but yet he drew closer still. The light came into full scope as he traveled, quickly blooming to the size of a door, then wall, then building. The light didn't stop, he didn't stop. It grew until the light took up his vision, until his world was swallowed entirely by the orb. Then, Leland felt his legs tremble, although without hostility. He wasn't tired or fearful, in fact he felt empowered, like he had just run a competitive marathon. The orb of blue trickled past his mind, urging him to take a step. He did, passing the threshold of the blue and entering the Lord of Spirits' domain. He entered a twilight forest of mile-high trees and curious creatures. Bugs and small animals watched him from their homes, mushrooms and vines twisted to his approach. Glowing moss and fungus led through the trees like directional lights on a runway. Leland followed the whimsical colors. Shadows shifted and moved, but again, he never felt in danger. If anything, Leland felt he was being welcomed. The beings that hid within the trees or under the mossy soil smiled and laughed, pleasantly surprised at a new guest in their domain. Leland tripped over a root. He stumbled into a tree, finding it sweet-smelling like maple sap candies the traveling merchants brought to his hometown in the early spring. He loved those things, even though they got trapped in his molars. He and the others would trade them like gold, toys for candy or candy for other sweets. Behind him, the path illuminated. Sapphire flames appeared on hand-whittled torches, lighting up the densely packed ground and underbrush. "Thank you," Leland whispered, pushing off from the reminder of home and following the trail of torches further into the forest. Eventually he came across a small clearing, one that fit well into the trees and vines. Plants had found solace in this place, the lack of a canopy allowing them to overgrow. They stretched along the moist ground for what felt like an eternity, growing over multiple downed logs and through the many cracks and valleys. At the center, within a bed of nesting, was a young woman. She sat alone, only the endless shadows to keep her company. She watched Leland through yellow sparkling eyes and stands of blue shimmering hair. Like a parent watching their child explore, the woman held a sense of pride. As Leland neared, the woman shifted, revealing 9 bushy pure white tails. 5 of the tails moved forward, halting the human in his tracks. "That is far enough, Leland Silver," the woman said, her voice fluttering like a bird song during the early morning sunrise. Leland pivoted at his waist, his line of sight finding the leafy ground beside his feet. "Lord of Spirits, it is an honor." All around, the shadows moved and danced, coming closer to get a better view. Mortals often grovel at the face of the unknown, you, however, have not. Even after facing the unspeakable. A deep frown found Leland's lips. He straightened his back and locked eyes with the ancient being before him. The yellow of her eyes dripped with mystery and mystique, enough to cause Leland to lose his train of thought. "You are beautiful," he whispered. Suddenly laughter echoed from the clearing in the forest. Hundreds, thousands even, of small blue orbs brightened and dimmed with the waves of giggles. They floated through the open air, twisting around the moss-covered trees or under wide flat leaves. "You all are," Leland continued. "Wisps, spirits, beings I've only heard about in stories. I can only say the stories are true, you all are beautiful." The forest went silent at his words, and one by one the orbs of blue, like the spirits, winked out of existence. "You embarrassed them," the Lord of Spirits said, holding her hand out to a brave spirit that dared move the closest. "Shy little creatures then. They like you, they can sense their brothers and sisters on you." Leland thought about her words. "The Onryos? Does that mean?" "Yes, these spirits in my domain are those of my own. Each was once human and once my wards, my legacies, if you would rather." "Wow," was all Leland could say. "Thank you for indulging them, we do not have many visitors." Leland's eyes popped open and he searched around him. "Oh. I brought a gift, but it looks like my spell didn't carry it with me." "That is quite all right. Just offer it to me at any of my shrines. The Onryos have a grand chapel within their home, that would surely work." The Lord paused for a moment, a faint flashing blue appeared beside her ear. "My family wishes to know what your gift is." "The best beer Shoutwell has to offer, and honey." "Honey? Indeed. My mother preferred to mix honey into her drink, always complaining that beer is too bitter." All around the clearing blue orbs lit up like excited fireflies. The Lord of Spirits spoke for them. "They have not had beer in a long time. You make them happy, I thank you." Leland smiled and watched the spirits float around. Some even neared him. "No need to thank me. But I do hope you will assist me. You have done many great deeds for my wards in the real world. You bring gifts, you speak with respect, and you compliment my family. My ears are open to your request." Her 9 tails came to a standstill just behind her head, like a soft pillow. I ask for 2 things, Leland began. First and more importantly is knowledge to assist House Onryo from falling to their debts. The Lord of Spirits did not react. And second, I ask for a way to defend myself and the others around me. Soon hundreds of blue spirits floated over to Leland. They took perches on his body, using his arms and shoulders like branches. Then the Lord of Spirits giggled. They really do like you. It is not often people ask for my help. It is even less often that someone asks for my help for others. Leland was afraid to move. He didn't want to disturb the spirits resting on him. The Lord of Spirits continued. Alas, how contracts work between Lord and recipient does not allow for information such as you ask. I cannot help you there. Leland's face fell. I understand. Tell me, what do you know of spirit fire? It is a catalyst of illusion and life. It is incredibly mana-intensive and often regarded as an investment legacy. Only a few known historic mages ever reached the point of seeing returns, however. Only old families, such as the Onryos, know enough to progress in the discipline, and even then, not very well. The Lord of Spirits nodded along to his explanation. I originally created spirit fire as a means of pacifism. It was meant to do no harm but touch upon people's primal fear. Illusion, as you call it. For me, it is about the preservation of life. I have never killed, a feat I hold with great pride. It wasn't until I accepted the fire's aspect that I truly learned to wield it. So you never took supplements for mana? Potions and the like? Leland asked. Those were not discovered until some millennia later. A smile caught in the back of Leland's mind. I see, thank you for sharing. The Lord of Spirits curtly nodded. Your second request is something I can procure. While it will not be as you expect, I hope you trust in my ageless wisdom. Sometimes a threat is enough, sometimes there is no reason to kill. Even when lives of loved ones are threatened. That is for you to decide. I, in my tribulations, have lost many loved ones. That is why I surround myself here. To fill the loneliness. Blue appeared all around the forest as thousands of spirits floated over to their lord. They landed on her, like butterflies covering a bed of flowers. Thank you, my children. You have all been very good to me. Thank you, she whispered before turning to her guest. Protect those you love. Protect those who cannot fight. Promise me and your contract will be made. I promise. Leland said despite the quiver in his voice. I promise I will. The Lord of Spirits gave him a small smile. It was a pleasure, Leland. Until we meet again. The forest lit up with blue before Leland suddenly found himself rushing away from a singular orb that took up the sky. As the minutes passed, the orb decreased in size until it was only a flame in the distance. He then blinked, finding the ceiling of the Onryo guest room. Chapter 32, Suspicion. Jude didn't notice Leland was awake until a purple grimoire appeared out of nowhere and flopped open. How'd it go? He asked. Leland stopped and suddenly found his eyes flooding. The Lord of Spirits is one of the most beautiful beings I've ever had the luxury to know. Jude made a whistling sound. Did you ask her to marry you? What, no? Just no. Daggers blasted from Leland's eyes. Beautiful as in she's special. A kindred soul to her family. Right. So did you get what you wanted? Yes to both, I think. It was a little roundabout, but I think I understood what she was trying to say for the Onryos. And for myself, well, let's see. Leland flipped to the section of his grimoire that dealt with curses. The page after the Lord of Magic entry was a new one. Cursed Contract of the Lord of Spirits. Use, for the duration of the contract, all magical abilities take on a single intended spiritual effect. Those may include, but are not limited to, intimidation, warmth and care, or calming. Only usable once per hour. Return, not breaking a promise. This time Leland was the one to whistle. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but this was not it. Illusions might have more depth to them than I thought. Jude raised an eyebrow and stepped over. Anything you can demonstrate? Sure, if you don't mind having your speed slowed for a little bit. That's fine. Leland pressed his palm into the contract page, summoning forth a gale of purple energy and mana. Shadows seemed to stretch for a moment as thousands of tiny flaming orbs of blue light fluttered into existence before begrudgingly fading away. A violet halo blazed into the room, forming just above his head before idly swaying with vapor. Whoa! Jude yelled, waking Glennie. What were those blue dots? I swear I heard one make fun of me. Glennie rubbed his eyes. Why do you sound so eager to be made fun of? Jude went to respond but Leland spoke over him. Those were spirits. Wisps, in other terms. The boy's eyes went wide. I know what you mean by beautiful now. They made fun of me and I only wanted to cuddle with them. Leland looked to Glennie. It seems we should be careful around enemies that can compel. Jude's a little weak in that department. I concur, said the rogue. Whatever, Jude scoffed. Are you going to hit me with a spell or sit there and make fun of me? I thought you liked being made fun of. Don't make me put you in another headlock. Glennie's face fell. Leland rolled his eyes, forming the architecture for Curse of Collapse in his mind. It started around his heart, connecting with Jude's before waiting for a spark of life force. As he pushed the curse into reality, he said a single word. Slow, whispered Leland, connecting his and Jude's hearts, allowing him a window into his friend's mind. He was scared, so scared. Not of the unknown or the enemies hiding within the sewers but of the simple fact that Glennie was nearly taken over. Sigils were something dangerous, something that they had no way to combat. The eye had scarred him with false reports and lies. It tricked his mind, forcing him to think about death. There was relief, of course, that Glennie was alive and well, but the eye's influence made him think about impure futures. One without Glennie or Leland, one without his friends. He couldn't allow that to happen. He needed to be the wall that protected the others. Leland came out of the connection breathing like a horse after a race. He sucked in lungfuls of air, finding the bedroom oddly comforting. He looked to the others, the purple halo above his head shimmering with radiant energy. Jude and Glennie suddenly found themselves relaxed and happy, like a cool night next to a fireplace. Memories of their parents came to mind, each finding comfort in reliving the time together. Jude leaned back into his wooden chair, the hard dowels poking into his spine like a massage given by the legacy of relaxation. He giggled to himself, wondering if such a lord existed. Glennie fell into his own head, the image of his mom too powerful to ignore. He closed his eyes and found himself swaying with imaginary music. Liquid formed within his eyelids as he could feel her warmth. Leland watched on, finding the effects significantly less potent for himself. He felt relaxed, sure, but he also remembered the threat hiding out in the city. Still, he couldn't make himself remove the spell early. Not when his two best friends were at peace. Jude and his anxiety and Glennie and his guilt. Eventually the curse of collapse faded on Jude, setting the room back to the cold cube it had always been. Thank you, Leland whispered just audibly while cancelling the Harbinger Halo curse. A blue flame appeared just before his nose before floating into it. It winked out of existence a breath later. Jude and Glennie both looked around, Glennie quickly rubbing his eyes as subtly as possible. Seems like it works, Leland said with a somber smile. I don't want to try a negative emotion on you too. Yet, Jude said, trailing off. Do you think you could have ignored the effect? Or was it that powerful? No, I definitely could. I just didn't want to, Glennie said. Agreed, Jude added as well. That's what I thought, I just didn't want to. A knock came from the door. Slowly, Jude moved to open it. Bor stood with his hands on his vest, his wrinkled face looking quite confused. "Pardon the interruption, but is Master Alkin or Lady Mavi in here?" Bor took only a single step, inspecting the room quite thoroughly. "No, the siblings aren't here," Leland said. "I thought Alkin was still passed out and, well, I guess I don't know where Mavi went." Bor scrunched his nose. "Lady Mavi is indeed elsewhere while Master Alkin is asleep still, yes. Apologies, the fog must be getting to me. I thought I felt the magic from their legacies." The boys looked at each other. "Oh?" Leland asked. "How do you mean?" "I am unsure if I am being honest. I just had a strange remembrance of my life before House Onryo hired my services." "And you think that the Lord of Spirits caused it?" Bor took a moment to answer. "I must be mistaken, only Lady Onryo could produce such a feeling and she is elsewhere as well." Leland shared a look with the others. "I think what you felt was a new spell of mine. I'm sorry for the confusion." Stepping out of the room but staying in the doorframe, Bor eyed the young man with careful consideration before turning to the others. His gaze fell on Jude's wrist, the hand he broke during the ambush attack. Then to Glennie and the danger that lived within his eyes. Finally he turned back to Leland, the one who had vanquished such a monster. Something was different about Bor's eyes, Leland saw. Something well before fear but nowhere near disinterest. "I see," Bor said. "Dinner will be served in 20 minutes. Is there anything I can get the three of you in the meantime? Tea? Muffins?" Jude opened his mouth to answer but Leland spoke first. "Is there a Lord of Spirits shrine in the house I could give an offering to?" Bor held his gaze for a long moment as he pondered the odd request. "Yes, please follow me." Leland stood up but stopped after only a single step. Jude, if you don't mind helping out." Jude groaned but picked up the barrel of beer. Glennie sighed and took the jar of honey from his friend with the broken arm. The trio then followed Bor to a small room connected to the study. "I shall give you privacy," the butler said before strolling off. "Just before the shrine, Jude, thanks." Leland took the honey from Glennie and placed it on top of the barrel before whispering, "Here is the beer and honey I promised, Lord of Spirits. The ratio of honey to liquid my mother uses is 3 spoonfuls per mug, but thinking about it, that may be wrong, seems rather sweet." Leland shrugged as the barrel and jar disappeared. Jude was the one to speak up first. "I think the weirdest part of this offering is that your mother adds honey to beer." "Who does that?" "Seems sacrilegious," Glennie laughed. Holding up his hands in surrender, Leland said, I know. She'd always embarrass my dad when we were at restaurants. I can't tell you how many waiters gave us weird looks. But 3 spoonfuls." Some minutes later, after the boys left the shrine room and were well established in the dining room, Bor slipped out of the shadows. His legacy wasn't perfect for stealth and subtlety, but he felt confident in his abilities to go unnoticed. They were children after all, he wasn't that old yet. He slowly creaked the door to the shrine room open, expecting to find a seemingly random barrel of beer taking up most of the walking area. But he was wrong. He looked for the honey, finding it missing as well. Bor was sure the boys walked out of the room empty-handed. Was there a trick involved? Or was something more sinister going on? It had been many years since he had thought of his early life before meeting Lady Onryo's grandfather. Most of it was filled with war and despair. He could count the number of happy memories from his youth on one hand. Just what kind of spell can do that? Bor asked himself, deciding to keep a better eye on Master Alkin's guests. Chapter 33, Descent Down. Dinner was fish and potato. "So how did the meeting go?" Leland asked the now-returned Lady Onryo and her daughter Lady Mavi. The younger of the two sighed deeply, scrapping at her plate unenthusiastically. "The guard has no idea what they are doing. Everyone is scared." "Did you mention the sewers?" Lady Onryo answered, "Yes, and they sent teams to investigate." "Nothing 6 teams entered at different points and all returned without any worthwhile information. The boys shared a glance. Perhaps sigils were. No, we had a specialist look for sigils. Nothing, not even on the sewer entrance Glennie found. Lady Onryo rubbed her temples. That entrance had been destroyed, however. Bor, walking around the table serving drinks, asked, destroyed how? Some sort of magical attack. A high-ranked one. It broke apart most of the concrete. Quite suspicious. Any witnesses? No, and that's the problem, Mavi said. No one wants to come forward. The fog and bodies are getting to people. Just a few hours ago the total raised to 15. 15. Glennie echoed. Seriously? And there haven't been any witnesses at all. There has, but they all say the same thing. They saw a woman in a white hooded robe. Not very helpful if you ask me. Leland and Jude looked at each other. About that. They then told the table about their return home from the tavern and the rushed woman leaving the scene of a still warm body. Similar story to the others, Lady Onryo said, shaking her head. It just doesn't help us very much. It may not, but I might have something that will. Leland took a deep breath and recited his practiced lie. Without going into many details, my legacy has some unique properties that allows me to be privy to some information. Now, I'm not saying I'm an expert or even that I analyzed the information given to me correctly, but I think I have some tips to progress the Lord of Spirits legacy. Lady Onryo took a long hard look at Leland before moving on to Jude and Glennie. Without noticing a hint of deceit, she motioned for the young man to continue. How much do you know about the history of spirit fire? The following conversation lasted several hours and in near silence. Only Leland and Lady Onryo discussed, and even then it was mainly Leland dodging questions about how he came to know these things. In the end, the idea that spirit fire was more than simple illusions and directly related to life and preservation were spread to those listening. I am not sure what you can do with this information, but I also know it is incredibly possible to progress in the discipline without use of supplemental potions or tonics. The room went still. Both Onryos went stark still, their posture towering over the slumping adventurers. An annoyance crawled up their faces, narrowing their eyes and pursing their lips. What do you know about supplements, boy? Lady Onryo spit. Only what Alkin told us, Leland answered quickly. You know nothing of my family and those we've lost. Do not think your friendship with my son allows you to be disrespectful, especially when you are in this house. I meant no disrespect, I apologize if I offended. A knock came from the mansion door. Bor hesitated but Lady Onryo waved him off. My eldest's death was more than a mana junkie getting a fix. Leland's face fell. I had no idea it was like that. Alkin only said he was searching for a way to speed up his spirit fire progression. I didn't know it was mana dust, I never would have insinuated, he trailed off. Lady Onryo stifled her anger. Her posture fell, her demeanor broke. I apologize. My son is a sore subject. Glennie was the one to speak up, losing a family member is horrible. Have you? Did Alkin not tell you? Lady Onryo shook her head. My mother was the royal inquisitor that was killed by the witch Icewillow 3 years ago. Oh. I'm so sorry. We didn't know. Mavi spoke up, Alkin only told us you 3 were the children of inquisitors, not anything past that. Glennie's frown had turned into a somber smile. It is all right. I just ask you not to spread this information around. Of course, Lady Onryo said. And the same goes for my son and his addiction. Alkin does not know the full story and we wish to keep it that way. Leland wasn't sure if he agreed with keeping family business hidden from one another but he held his tongue. Last thing he wanted was to upset his hosts more than he already had. Bor saved the conversation by entering the dining room with a hesitant guard captain. Lady Onryo, Bor said, his hands finding grip on his vest. Captain Lurch says there's been another murder. I am sorry for interrupting dinner, my lady, but this is urgent. Lurch began. A body has been found and I need to ask some questions. Ask me some questions? Heavens, why? Lady Onryo asked. Not you, ma'am. The one named Leland. All eyes flicked to the young mage. Me? He asked. Why? You were the name on his delivery slip. A barrel of beer. Leland flattened in his seat. I see. What do you need to ask? Was the barrel delivered already? Yes. Did you notice anything suspicious about the deliverer? Bohr dealt with him, I didn't even need to sign. I see, Lurch whispered, taking notes. Have you left the premises today? No. Can anyone vouch for that? Everyone in here besides the ladies, yes. Lurch scanned the room, receiving multiple head nods. I see, he said. Thank you for your time. Turning to leave, the captain hesitated in the door frame. Is something the matter, Captain? Lady Onryo asked. It's just that this murder was different. He still had his eyes, you see. It wasn't the sightless. Mavi asked. The tavern the deceased worked at was known as a crime den, Lurch's words went dry. We suspect this was an opportune killing to get rid of problematic employees. Then shouldn't you be interviewing the tavern owner? I would if I could. What do you mean? Leland asked. The owner is dead as well, his tongue cut out. Jude interjected. Someone thinks he was a rat. He did seem open to selling information. The captain frowned. Now hold on. Have you been? That is quite enough, Captain, Lady Onryo said, standing. Before accusations are made, I would like to put one simple fact out there. These 3 adventurers sharing a meal with me tonight are under my employment. Think of them as private investigators. I see, Lurch said after a moment. Just one final question then. Why did you choose the river and the cavern to investigate? Leland answered with a shrug. I needed beer and it was the first brewery we found in the fog. The captain hummed at that. I see, thank you for your time. With that, the man left the mansion and 3 sets of eyes were suddenly on Leland and the others. The river and the cavern? Really? How did you 3 manage to find yourselves there? Glennie answered. Because it was the tavern nearest the docks. We figured the connection from dock workers to smugglers wasn't that big of a leap. Lady Onryo nodded to that, smart. What did you learn? That a smuggler named Poppy was the one to ask about unique body parts. Bohr went still. Poppy, you say? Yeah. You know her? We have a history, yes. Think you could introduce us? Again Bohr hesitated. She's dangerous. Lady Onryo didn't seem to care. Bohr, take the boys to meet this Poppy character, that's an order. Of course, my lady, the butler said before turning to the others. We leave at midnight. Prepare your weapons, we could be walking into something we wish we hadn't. A few hours later, the boys and Bohr were hiding behind a set of crates near the docks. In the air the sound of soft waves crashed against wooden ships resting in the harbor. The boys wore their normal everyday battle wear, but the butler had changed into a thin leather armor. The armor was scored, cut, and patched over again and again. It was old, very old. The kind of armor left from father to son from the days of war some centuries ago. Orange flickering flames led the route through the dense fog, like mile markers on a highway. They lined the dock's edge, a single step past meant going for a swim. Bohr gave a muted signal just before he dashed to the next set of crates. Once set, Leland could hear the voices. They were quiet and slurred, drunk he supposed. Whispering to the butler, he said, "What do we do?" The group of 4 had progressed like this for the last 2 blocks, making use of the unnatural fog to near the harbor. Luckily they hadn't come across any human blockades prior to the set before them now. Bor deliberated for a moment before tossing a scrap piece of wood blindly through the fog. A loud clank followed by multiple grunts echoing in alarm through the area. Bor counted to 10, then signaled to move again. Frankly, Leland didn't quite understand why they needed to remain hidden. Did Bor think Poppy would help them if they snuck up on her? The question was lost in his mind as they continued down the docks, eventually stopping at a certain dark lantern. "Why did we stop here?" Glennie whispered. "Some sort of marker." Bor nodded and said, "Trust me on this." He then stepped off the dock, falling into the depths below. The boys looked to each other for a moment before Jude gave a hesitant shrug. He jumped off a moment later, followed by Glennie, and eventually Leland. They landed on a set of tied rowboats anchored to the underside of the dock. Bor had already pushed forward across the makeshift bridge and onto rotted scaffolding. A long rusted-out door stood silently behind him, only an off-yellow dim monolight illuminating the area. Warnings had been carved into the surrounding wood, crude and often nothing more than simple phrases like, "Enter and die." Bor knocked in a rhythmic pattern, although no sound came from the metal door. It was then Leland saw the glyphs carved into the door frame. "Sound suppressants," he whispered to the others. "Whoever is behind there wants to remain hidden." Suddenly a slot on the door snapped open and two blood-stained eyes looked through. Bor didn't seem surprised and simply said, "Malt is better than hops." The man behind the door grunted and pulled it open. Bor then turned to the boys, "I would like to welcome you to Shoutwell's Smugglers Guild."